"I want you to meet Mr. Craw," twittered Lola Winant to me. "He claims to be a werewolf." And she spun around, fluttery hands, fluttery white shoulders, fluttery blonde curls, fluttery skirts of green silk, to lose herself in the crowd of noisy guests at the sideboard. Mr. Craw and I took 2 or 3 steps in the opposite direction, as though we both sought peace and quiet. "Sit down," I suggested, and we dropped upon a divan in the half-gloom behind Lola Winant's big grand piano. Then we looked at each other. He was a huge, high-shouldered creature in rather seedy dress clothes, with coarse black hair grown low on his forehead and around his flat-lying, pointed ears. His long anvil of a chin lay snugly between the wings of his collar, his long poniard of a nose lay upon his chin, and his mouth caught between was as tight and lipless as a slit in pale leather. The oystery hue of his face accentuated the wet licorice black of his eyes. Despite myself, I felt timid. "Well," he invited huskily, "do I look it?" "You mean like a werewolf?" I prompted and paused, smiling for the witty retort. But he shook his head. "It happens to be quite true," he assured me, as solemn as though he were drunk or insane. I jumped at that, although I was used to meeting bizarre figures in the Winant parlor. Not knowing what to say, I kept my own nervous mouth shut. After a musing moment, Craw went on. "I came here tonight looking for help in my desperate problem. Winant and his wife are supposed to be experts in occultism." "Mr. Craw," I could not help saying, "the Winants are unmitigated fakes." "I was thinking that," he nodded glumly. "Apparently their only reason for letting me come was to make sport for their friends." A pause, awkward, for me at least. "Well, then, shall I tell you?" "Please do," I urged, feeling strangely foolish and rapt. Craw hunched his shoulders, sank his head, and let his clasped hands slide down between his knees until the thick knuckles almost rested on the floor. There was something animal-like in the attitude. His body and limbs seemed measured and jointed to an abnormal pattern. His licorice eyes sought mine, and at the moment they did not look exactly human, either. Too much gloomy iris for one thing, and too little rim or white for another. In their depths lurked a green glow, feeble but hard. "TT began," said Craw, "when I experimented with the witch ointments." "Witch ointments?" "Yes. Supposed to be rubbed on for changes into animal forms, made and used by devil worshippers. They sound fantastic, I admit, but I was a medical student, working on a paper about pre-Renaissance drugs. There were several recipes. Not actual recipes," I protested. "A dozen, at least. The 1896 Bulletin of Johns Hopkins Hospital printed one, in an article by Dr. Robert Fletcher. Several contemporary scientists have reproduced others, wholly or in part. And let me tell you, there's more sound pharmacy in them than you'd think." I thought, indeed I hoped, that he was merely spoofing. But there was no bantering smile upon his lipless mouth, and his eyes looked drawn and haggard about the corners. "Belladonna, for instance," he amplified. "It's a common ingredient. And monkshood, full of deadly aconitine, henbane, that Shakespeare called the insane root, and hemlock. These and other powerful items, made into a salve with the fat of an unbaptized child, I say," I broke in, not very ceremoniously. "You don't ask me to believe that but I did." Again that melancholy nod of assurance. "There was a baby's body fetched into the dissecting room at school." He paused and his eyes grew narrow, as though to gaze down some fearful groove in his memory. "Well, I mixed the stuff up. For a lark." His mouth slashed open in a rueful grin, revealing oversize, uneven teeth. "You rubbed it on," I suggested. Once more he nodded, and I pursued, "What happened?" "Nothing at first." Craw sat up straight again, and spoke more clearly. "I don't know what I expected to happen, or if in truth I expected anything. But I do remember feeling like a fool, and an unclean fool at that. I started to clean the grease off, but it had penetrated into me somehow, like a vanishing cosmetic." He shuddered, briefly but violently. "As I say, nothing happened all that day, or that night, or the next day. But the next night," and his voice dropped suddenly to a breathy mutter, "was the night of the full moon. On the instant, I remembered a host of stories with which my childhood nurse had regaled me, stories about the full moon and its effect on men and their destinies. Few of them had been pleasant. Craw was plunging ahead, speaking more swiftly. Moonlight meant romance to me then, and nothing else. I got a girl and went walking by the river, collegian fashion. She was a liberal arts sophomore. There was a sort of sandy jut out into the water, and we loitered out there. Something I said made her laugh, with her face turned up to me in the moonlight. Then she stopped laughing, and her mouth twisted like a snake when you tread on it. "Whatever for?" I asked. Her eyes, on my face, were terribly frightened. Craw leaned suddenly toward me. I caught, or fancied I caught, a whiff of musky odor as from an animal cage. Involuntarily, I slid back and away from him on the cushions. I had just remembered that there was a full moon that night. Again Craw's tense voice. She tried to scream, and I got frightened too. I grasped her by the shoulder to calm her. When I touched her flesh, a new mood suddenly took possession of me. Of its own will my hand shifted to her throat. Shaking her, I snarled at her to be silent. And she sagged down in a faint. My thoughts and feelings churned all up, as if in a new sense of exultant power at conquest. Then, he spread his great, spatulate fingers. In the morning, they found her gnawed body. In the afternoon, while I was still telling myself that it was a dream, the police came to my dormitory. They discovered blood on my clothing and under my nails. "You were that Craw," I exclaimed. His smile was bitter. "Oh, so you read the papers. Undergraduate beast man, the headlines called me, and medico monster." I told the police the solemn truth, and it was too much for them to take seriously. They called in alienists. I was sent to the asylum, not to the electric chair. "Look here," I ventured, in a voice that threatened with every word to die in my throat, "I think you'd better talk about something else. You shouldn't have let yourself go on this business in the first place." But he shook his head, so emphatically that the coarse locks stirred at his narrow temples. "I'm not crazy. You see, only 2 weeks ago I was officially certified normal." He sniffed. How could they know the frenzy, the rage, the thirst for blood, that closed over me like water in my locked room, every month, on the night when the moon was full? His clenched hands lifted. I saw his nails, pointed and thick and opaque, like pieces of mussel shell. I used to howl and shriek, so that the attendants came to pacify me. I bit them for their pains and knew the punishment of the straitjacket. It was 2 years before a cunning sneaked in with the moon madness, a cunning that whispered I must suffer in silence if ever I wanted to go free. "And you were silent?" T was. At length the doctors had me up for another examination. They hammered at my knees for reflexes, asked a bunch of clever questions, and finally discharged me as cured. Once again a pause. But of course I wasn't cured. "Surely," I mouthed in most stupid fashion, "surely you wanted to be cured." I did. Craw snapped his big teeth together behind the 2 words, as though to emphasize them. So, as I say, I turned to the Winnets. I'd heard somewhere that they knew devil and all about occultism. A week ago, I hunted James Winnan out at his club and told him the whole cursed business. Told him what UV just told me. Right. And he heard me out, then said nothing for a full 5 minutes. Finally, he smiled and said, "I'll help you. On the night of the full moon, I'll be entertaining. Come to my place then, and we'll make everything all right." He leaned against the cushions, as if his story was done. I wriggled nervously, wondering if he was very clever, even more so than most of the bizarre Winnant guests, or if he was honest and dangerous. Then I considered strongly getting up and walking rapidly away. "Oh, there you are, Mr. Craw," squealed Lola Winnant behind our shoulders. "Some girls have come. They're dying to meet." She swooped down upon him and bore him away toward 3 young women with vapid, painted smiles. It was my chance to leave, and thankfully I took it. I crossed the room to the chairs where the hats and coats were piled. Glancing over my shoulder, I saw Craw yet again, from behind. His shoulders seemed to have grown strangely narrow and humped themselves in a fashion somehow hyena-like. His hair, perhaps it was not carefully combed at the back of his low skull, was shaggy. His ears, that I had thought flat, inclined forward, as though voluntarily pricked up. He claims to be a werewolf. Lola Winnant was finishing her introduction, and a tinkle of laughter swung around. I left without being noticed. That was last night. Before me lies the morning paper with a most arresting headline: For torn corpses found in parlor. Police baffled over murder of James Winnant and guests. Seek Beast Man. I have not yet forced myself to read the rest.